Hello everyone and welcome back to another WebDev lessons video. Today's lesson is all about function arguments. We're going to talk about what they are, how to use them, why they'd be useful, and we're going to cover pretty much everything that has to do with function arguments. Before we do that though, we are going to do some exercises that will recap kind of what we did in the last lesson and give you some more challenging stuff to work on. None of it is new. We've covered everything you'll need in order to complete those exercises. All that was covered in the first video. So if you're having difficulty with the problems, go ahead and rewatch the first video, or if you're really stuck, you can either email me or join the Slack group and send a group message or private message to me, and you can find both of those links, my email and the Slack group link, on the WebDev Lessons contact page. Okay, good luck with those exercises. You're going to find those right below this video on the WebDev Lessons website. It should be a link that says something like exercises, GitHub, repo, functions, exercises, or something like that. You're going to find that link, that button. You're going to do those exercises, and then you're going to come back and continue with the next portion of the video. Alright, good luck. Go ahead, pause the video now, do those exercises, and we'll see you in a second. Okay, so we are now on the GitHub repo for this lesson. So I'm going to go ahead and clone it to my desktop, and I'm going to assume you've already forked the repo. So you can just follow along with me, moving from the cloning step forward. Alright, so we're going to grab this link and we are going to open our terminal. Remember, you can hold Command space and then type terminal if you can't find it, or you can use your little spotlight icon up here as well if you're on a Mac. So you're also going to make sure that you have your WebDev Lessons exercises folder open, which is what I have here, and this is what we cloned last time. In the last video, this was our last file. So I'm going to go ahead and just open these side by side so you can see both. And I'm going to do git clone and paste that in. And there we go. So now we can cd into that. So we can actually, let's run an ls real quick, and then let's cd into WebDev function arguments. And now let's see what's in here. You'll see there's a bunch of files, so let's go ahead and pop this into our text editor. So once you've got your text editor open, obviously the first thing we want to do is, and you can run this command from terminal, which is where I would recommend running it, you're going to run open index.html. And that is going to open your test file. These are all the tests that you will have to pass in order to move on from this lesson. So, before we can do that though, you have to know what function arguments are. So let's go ahead and get into that. So, our very first problem tells us to create a function called return arg that takes in an argument and returns it. And for this particular problem, we're actually going to do this one together, and then you can do the rest of them on your own. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a variable, and we're going to make it equal to a function. Let's create a function called return arg, like this. And now we have a function, and you should be pretty familiar with this. We talked about this in the last lesson. So in here, what we used to do and what we did in the last lesson was we were just returning strings like this, or we were returning real numbers like this to just return simple objects or simple data types. So what we're going to do in this lesson is we're actually not going to really worry about the middle part too much yet. We're going to focus on this part here, and in particular what's in between these two my mouse cooperates, in between these two parentheses. Now these parentheses up till this point we've just been leaving open, but there is a lot of potential, there's a lot of things you can do with these parentheses. Whatever you put inside of these parentheses becomes the function's signature or the function's argument. So if I were to say arg1 or even argument 1. I've just created, in a sense, a variable that I can then use throughout the body of my function. So if I wanted to do something like return or create a variable called add arg plus 3 and set that variable, probably would be better if I did this. And then I set that variable to equal argument 1, and you see my text editor is already filling that in for me, which is nice, plus 3, I am actually using what's passed in here. Now, we currently have not set a value for this argument, but we're going to talk about that in just a second. But for now, I want to stress the fact that this is a variable. You can use it wherever you want. You cannot, however, change its data. Notice I'm adding this and I'm setting it, assigning it to a variable. You cannot say argument 1 equals and then assign it a data, because then you'll be overwriting it and you're defeating the purpose. Yeah, at that point, you might as well just create a variable called whatever you want and do that. So don't overwrite your variable here by doing a statement like this, like changing it to 3 plus 3, or changing it to a number, or changing it to a string. Don't overwrite your arguments. Instead, try to use them. So now let's talk about where we would actually set this argument. What we're going to do is we're going to go down to where we would invoke our function, and we are going to put something inside of these parentheses. And this is actually where we define what argument 1 is going to be equal to. So at this point, and remember, your function doesn't get run until we invoke it. So we've defined it here, right? And we are relying on this argument 1 to exist in order for our function to run. So it might be a smart idea, and we'll get into if statements later, but it might be a smart idea to check to see if argument 1 exists, which that will return true, and we'll get into this later, then run your code, else do something else, because it might not exist, it might be nothing. But for now, let's just assume that this does exist. And right now, it doesn't exist. Right now, we have put nothing inside of our parentheses. Argument 1 is blank. So this would most likely return an error. What we need to do is we need to put a data inside of our parentheses when we invoke our functions. That data then becomes argument 1. So if I were to put inside here, if I were to put 3, try and guess, before I tell you the answer, try and guess what this would be equal to. If we return this function, if we said return add arg plus 3, we would get 6. Because we passed 3 in as argument 1. That's called passing in an argument. And we've passed that in here. And then we take that argument and we're adding 3 to that value. And then we are returning that variable where we added the argument and 3 together. We could do the same thing, and we could instead do it with strings. So we could instead say, let's do this, hello, and then let's say plus argument 1. And again, you can name this whatever you want. It's a variable, so it might be easier at this point to just say arg1. Or maybe we'll say text plus our text, and then we're going to return that. So now, obviously, this isn't text. So let's change this to a string, and let's say, of course, world. So now this would return, take a moment, it would actually, because we haven't formatted this correctly, we would actually get this. But if we wanted to add a space, we would put a space there, or we could put a space here. I'm going to put it after the hello. And now we would get this. Okay, I do want to add just a quick side note. For this problem number 3, We haven't really discussed this, but in a sense we have. Think about these arguments as variables. You can create as many of them as you need. There is a limit number, but you'll never reach it with the problems you're doing. It's a humongous limit. So when we do this, we would probably do something like this. Let's build this real quick together. So we could say add two args equals function. And in here, we can pass in any arguments we need. We know for a fact, though, that it tells us we only need to take in two arguments, which is really great. Under normal circumstances, you may not know how many arguments are being passed in. In this case, there are two, so we know for sure that we need to just account for two arguments. So let's do that. Let's name one arg1 and another arg2. Really simple. We now have access to two arguments, and they can be used exactly the same way we used them before. If we wanted to say var arg added or args added, we could set that to equal arg1 plus arg2. And we might be able to add that together. Now, I have just given you the answer to this problem. What I wanted to demonstrate, though, was I wanted to demonstrate the fact that these are just variables. Think of them as variables, so they could be named anything. You can name it first num, or sure, furnum, why not? Yeah, that works too. And then second num, if you want to. They don't even have to be number. You could say topping for a pizza, and dough for the pizza. And then you just have to put those same things in here. It really doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter. As with variables, creating these var names, they really don't matter to the code. Now, to you as a coder, that's where it matters, and that's where we name them specific things, and that's where nomenclatures come up, and that's where semantics and all that kind of stuff. But in this case, it really wouldn't matter. You're going to be better off with math problems using arg1 and arg2 because that makes the most amount of sense. So as a coder going back later, that's going to make the most amount of sense to you and you're going to understand what this is. Now, we haven't actually solved this problem. There is one line of code, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. See if you can figure it out. It's actually very easy. You probably already know it. If you don't, that's fine. See if you can figure out what's missing here. Besides the invocation. Obviously, the invocation is something else, but I'm talking about the function body right now. So we would pass this in. This would actually not return anything. We would not get anything. So why? Yeah, you'll have to figure that out. But I did want to add that quick side note. Okay. So really simple. This is a really simple lesson, but that's it. That's all you need to know in order to complete these exercises. By this point, functions should make sense. You should know definitions. You should know invocations. Then you should also know the difference between strings and numbers. And you should know variables. We've talked about that here as well. You should now also understand what I've done here, where I've passed in an argument to this function. So I haven't really given you the answer. I've kind of shown you what you should do. But try and take what I just did, and if you need to rewatch the video, that's alright, but try and take what I just did and use that to solve these 4 exercises. Alright. Okay, everyone. Nice job. You made it through another WebDev Lessons video. Hopefully that made a lot of sense and nothing was too confusing. We didn't really go over a lot of content in this video, but we did cover some decent material. There are just a few things I want to mention. First of all, when you go to check your tests, you will have to refresh your HTML page. You probably have figured that out already, but you do need to refresh the page so that Mocha and Chai can do their work and check your tests for you. Second thing is, don't forget to keep looking back at your tests. You may have solved something inadvertently without knowing you solved it. If you have, it's probably a good idea to know that it works. Because if it does work, then you can look back at your code and see what you did right, and then apply that maybe to some of the other exercises. You'll know if it worked or not by checking the tests HTML, the index.html page, and looking at the tests. If you've got a green check mark, then you know it passed. You got an X, you know it didn't pass. You should know this. I'm just kind of reviewing so there's no confusion. Okay, so nice work. That's the end of this video. We will see you in the next video where we look at everything we've done so far in just a ton of example questions. Alright, good luck. We'll see you guys then.